Thank God for anybody who put up with me. So if you put up with me tonight, I'll thank the Lord for it. Stand with me, please. Open your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. This is an old line of truth. And I certainly ask the Lord this afternoon, now, Lord, are you sure that's what you want me to share with the folk tonight? Because we've heard it so long, so much, that the Lord made it very plain to my heart that this is what He wanted me to share with you. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, we begin with verse 51. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying which is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. But thanks be unto God which giveth us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Thank you. You may be seated. I want to say, first of all, that I want to compliment most of the preachers that were sitting up front here tonight for having good sense. Or most of them moved back to get out of line and follow tonight. They certainly manifested a lot of good judgment. Did you notice what we read here tonight? Oh, death, where is thy sting? Oh, death, where is thy sting? This chapter, 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians, is a marvelous bit of divine truth. The apostle discusses life and death and immortality. And if we read the entire chapter, I think we'll get a clear view of what it means to face the eternal life that's ahead of us and eternity that's ahead of us. And we get just reading pieces of it. But after having discussed several different phases and facts about death and eternity and immortality, I think the apostle waxed bold in his writing. Somehow or other, he just felt like he was talking directly to that thing which transports us across the line of worlds. And finally, he comes down to cry out, Oh, death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? And he answers that question. The sting of death is sin. And the strength of sin is the law. He carries on a conversation with death. I'd like for us tonight, in our thinking imagination, to pick up that conversation and pursue it a little farther. Oh, death, where is thy sting? Death, that thing which is dreaded, which is feared, which is hated, and yet is the most common experience in America tonight. I mentioned this in one other service. Up until a few years ago, more people were being born into this country than were dying. But about 5 or 6 years ago, death overtook the birth rate. And now, more people are dying than are being born, thanks to abortion and a few other things. And I mentioned the other day, someone might say, well, Brother Denton, how is it if more people are dying than being born? How is it that our population is increasing so rapidly? That's because countless millions of people are coming into this country from other nations. The Native American population is going down, while the population of those who are coming from other countries is rapidly increasing. And our birth rate, friends, is rapidly losing ground to the death rate. Going down. You say, Brother Denton, is it your point tonight to try to scare us? Not at all. For if you're a child of God, you're not scared of death. Huh? Well, I tell you right now, if I had never heard a sermon on death, if I'd never read a Bible, if nobody had ever told me that there was a heaven to gain and a hell to shun, just to have seen the people die that I have seen go out would have convinced me that there was a good place for some folks and a horrible, horrible place for others. Oh, I know nowadays we don't see much of that. Most everybody dies unconscious now. Either unconscious from natural consequences or unconscious from medicine that's shot into us. And people are dying by the millions now and going to hell and not knowing that they're about to drop into that pit. There used to be a time when the saints of God could leave a testimony behind, could urge their loved ones to meet them in heaven, could leave behind a testimony and a plea that folks would meet them on the other side and it'd have an influence and many would get to God. And those that were dying without God would leave behind a warning. I've helped to hold men in bed as they screamed and fought demons and devils and begged us to get them out of the fire and leave behind a warning. On the other hand, I've stood to the dying bed of saints of God as they were walking across the line of worlds and almost feel the very wind from the angels' wings as they carried them into glory. I'll tell you, friends, if I'd have never been told there was a heaven and a hell, I'd have known there was something out there. Death, where is thy sting? Let's just assume now that death answers that question a few times for us tonight. I think, first of all, death would say my sting is in the frequency of my coming. Have you ever stopped to consider how rapidly, how frequent, how often death is invading this land of ours? I remember when I was a boy down in the holler. I know that some of you Kentuckians and southern Indianians know what a holler is. That's that slit of space between two hills. Down in the holler where I live, the old preachers used to come out. My father ran a business in town. We lived 3 miles out of the country. He'd bring preachers out there, just about any kind of a preacher that came along that wanted a place to stay. They ended up at the Denton house. And they'd preach. And most of the time, they didn't have a lot to preach, but most of the time when they'd preach, somewhere in their preaching, they would say something like this. With every tick of the clock, somebody dies. I'd go home, old farmhouse where we lived. Go to bed back there in that lean-to off the back of the house where we boys slept. Lights were out. Kerosene lamps. They were turned off. Dark out there. Down the holler. An old dog would be baying at the moon. You city dudes don't know what a mournful sound is till you've heard that. Over here on the hillside, just in front of the house, an old screech owl would be gritting out his mournful note. And often in the living room, Mother's old Seth Thomas clock, that big long pendulum, would be ticking away the time. Tick, tock, tick, tock. And up and down my spine would run shivers as I'd remember what the preacher said. With every tick of the clock, somebody dies. And I'd think I might be the next one. You say, Denton, you were silly. May I stop here to say this, friends? Of all the boys that were in the classes, I had 3 brothers. With all the boys that were in the classes with myself and my brothers in that little one-room country school, Two of my brothers and myself are the only ones that are left. It wasn't silly. Only God in His mercy has let us live. Here we are just for the mercies of God. With every tick of the clock, they'd say, somebody dies. But that isn't so anymore. For long ago, death outran the clock. And now, instead of one dying every second, instead of 60 a minute going out into eternity, more than 100 people are crossing the line of worlds and going into eternity with every minute. Think of that. 6,000 people and more an hour. 72,000 and more between the rise of the sun and the going down of the same. More than 144,000 people going out in eternity with every 24 hours. And most of them going out without God. No wonder God told us some 2,800 years ago that hell had enlarged itself and opened its mouth without measure. Did you ever stop to think about what that would mean to the state of Indiana? That many people? If this camp meeting goes on 10 days and then it takes another day for everybody to get home, in that 11-day period, 1,587,000 and more people will cross the line of work. You know how many that is? All right, listen with me. That's more people will die during this camp meeting than live in Indianapolis, Evansville, Fort Wayne, Gary, South Bend, Hammond, Muncie, Terre Haute, Washington, and Anderson. What if in the morning the word went out that all of these cities have been devastated and that everybody in those cities in Indiana? Did you notice that list of cities? Suppose the word went out around the world that everybody in those cities had died. Something had happened that every major city in the city of Indiana had suddenly been devastated and every citizen in those cities was dead. Why, brother, it'd be an international tragedy. Every kind of an organization possible would be put to work. The government would supply all the men it possibly could to try to help with such a horrible tragedy. And foreign countries would send their condolences. That's all they ever send us, but they'd probably send their condolences. It's an awful thing to have such a tragedy as that. And yet, friends, every 11 days while this camp is going on, more than that many people die and go out into eternity, and some of us never get stirred by it. The frequency of the coming of death ought to shock us into doing something about our soul salvation. We don't know when we're going to be the next. I was down in a camp meeting in Virginia some years ago. The Lord laid a peculiar statement on my mind the last night of that camp. I made the statement, there are two people in this congregation whose casket is already down here in the funeral home. I never made a statement like that before nor since, except in relating this incident. The president of the camp said to me after the service, he said, well, Brother Denton, that was a funny thing to say. Truth be told, he says, I don't think he much liked it. Well, I said, sir, I know it was, but God laid it on my heart. I felt it to be a truth. The next Friday morning, my phone rung. And the voice of that camp president on the phone, he identified himself, and there was a sob in his voice. He said, Brother Denton, I just called you to ask you to forgive me for questioning you Sunday night. He said, there's two people who were sitting near the front of that service Sunday night who are lying down here in the funeral home this morning. Friends, we don't know. We don't know. Oh, death, where is thy stay? My staying, it might say, is in the frequency of my coming. But there's something worse than that. Thank God those two people that were in the funeral home that morning were good saints of God. I can say that. But we don't know when it's coming, but there is something worse. than just dying. So let's ask it again. Oh, death, where is thy sting? And death might answer, my sting is in the suddenness of my coming. For we never know how suddenly it may come. You just don't know. Here's somebody going down the highway, laughing, talking, never thinking about death. And yet, 1 minute later, the entire automobile full of people may be out in eternity. Across these many years that I've been on the highways traveling across this country, I've seen a lot of them on the highway go out into eternity. I've helped to get numbers of people out of wrecks that would never breathe another breath in this world. We don't know. We don't know. Oh, we're looking forward to a lot of things, you know. How long is it to your birthday? Well, we can tell them exactly. And we're glad to tell them, hoping they'll give us something. But anyway, we can tell them. Some of these young ladies here, probably boys may already have their wedding date set. I was in a preacher's home some time ago, and one of his daughters came up to me all excited. Oh, Brother Denton, I'm going to get married. I said, how horrible. But anyway, I said, when's that? She told me exactly the date, the month, the day, the hour, and the minute. She had it right down. How much money do you have? Wouldn't take any of us long to count it since Gene Gray's been after us in this camp meeting. You can tell how old you are. You can tell exactly how much you weigh. You can tell when some things are planned to take place out there in the future. You know how much you own. You can tell anything and everything about yourself and your personal history or your personal affairs, but not a single one of us here know the date of our funeral. That's the one thing that we're going to do that we don't know. The suddenness of it. Oh, my, how quickly it can come. I don't need to tell stories here tonight to illustrate that fact. I suppose that most of us, if not all of us, are thinking about some incident that would meet that statement tonight. We've had loved ones go out quickly. We've had friends go out quickly. Oh, I've been reared, spent all of my life in East Tennessee, though I've been all over the country and several other countries. And I seldom pick up the newspaper, but what I see, the names and the obituaries of people that I've known, sometimes folks that I have preached to and pastored in the years gone by. Last week, just before leaving home, I picked up the paper. In fact, about all I ever get time to read in the papers, the obituaries. The ladies in the office laugh at me. I say, well, I look at the obituary column, and if my name isn't there, then I get up and go to work. But anyway. But last week, just before I left to come up here, looked in the newspaper, and here's the name of a young man, 29 years old. A boy that I have known. I knew his grandfather. His grandfather was an old Western Methodist preacher, one time a conference president and a college president in the Western Methodist Church. The son is the head of a children's work in East Tennessee. But here was his son, 29 years of age, suddenly swept out into eternity. Friends, we don't know. Death might say this, my staying is in the suddenness of my coming. But really, there's something worse about death than that. So let's ask it again. Oh, death, where is thy sting? Death might answer, my sting is in the manner of my coming. We don't know how we're going to leave this world. I remember being here in Indiana some years ago when a fellow got peeved at me, some of my preaching. Of course, none of you have done that. But a fellow he was sanctified, so he couldn't get mad. He just got extremely exasperated. And he laid me out after service. That's one reason I'm not afraid to die. I've been laid out so many times, it won't be any new experience. But the next morning, still with a little bit of stir, I suppose, down inside, started to work. His wife called to him and said to husband, you do something to that old wringer. Back in the days of the old wringer type washers. Said, do something into that wringer. The thing don't work right. Well, he didn't like being bothered. Goes over and starts fiddling with that old wringer and trying to get it to go. And somehow or other, got his fingers in the thing and he got to rolling. And instead of reaching over and cutting it off, he began to pull and yank. And it began to pull and yank. With the consequence, it tore the flesh from the bones all the way up to his elbow. Infection set in. All kinds of things happened. We went to the hospital. We prayed with him. As far as I know, he never did get that thing out of his heart that caused him to have that kind of a spell. And before the revival was over, we buried that fellow. He didn't know that was going to happen to him. You don't know what's going to happen to you. No, sir. No, sir. I was here in a meeting in the western end of this state some years ago. The first night of that meeting, I paid my disrespects to the television business. I don't have any respects to pay. I just have to pay disrespects. And my disrespects get stronger as the years go by, as that thing gets nastier and more vulgar and more rotten all the time. Fellow got mad. He happened to be a leader in the church. He gave me to understand the close of that message, no 2x4 hillbilly is going to tell him what to do. I wasn't trying to tell him what to do, I was just trying to warn him about what he was already doing. The next morning at 8 o'clock, I was staying in the church. They had a room for the preacher. I was staying there. Next morning at 8 o'clock, I heard the preacher coming up the steps to my room calling to me, Brother Denton, come on, come on. I got out as quick as I could and down the steps and out the door and into his car. And we were a block down the street before he could ever tell me what had happened. You remember that man I got after you last night? Yes. He's gone this morning. What? He lived out in the edge of town, had a little farm as well as a business. Went out that morning while his wife was getting breakfast to milk the cow. Didn't get back in at his normal time. She sent the little boy after him. The little boy came back with the news that Daddy's laying out there in the hallway of the barn. He was gone. I'll never forget that scene. I went with that pastor to that home, not with the spirit of saying, I told you so. God forbid. Friend, if you got that attitude toward anybody that's having trouble, you're as carnal as crap can be. But we went to help that precious widow woman. When we walked in that house, that old TV sitting there in the living room, and already she'd covered it with a black cloth. And I couldn't help but glance at the thing, and she saw me, and she said, Brother Denton, I never did think that thing was right in a holiness home. But her husband was gone. Less than 12 hours after he had laid the preacher out for preaching against him. You don't know the manner in which you're going to go. Some go with a long sickness. Some go suddenly. Some go in wrecks. Some go in bed. Some go one way. We don't know how we're going. But we're going. I never shall forget my older brother. He's 82 years of age now. Living with his second wife. His first one died. I'll tell you about. He was a businessman in the city of Chattanooga. Well fixed financially. 1/3 owner of a large knitting mill in Rossville, Georgia. One time personnel manager of his own business with 1,400 employees under him. He had it going his way. But one day, went into one of these x-ray buses, chest x-ray buses they used to put on the streets. He wanted to see how the thing worked. He didn't have any idea there was anything wrong with him, but a few days later, he got a notice from the health department to report to his doctor from the doctor to the hospital. They removed everything they could from one lung, from one side, and before he got out of there, he had 3 major heart attacks. Looked like he'd never make it. By the time he got out of there, he was broken in health and had to retire and quit. He was at home. His wife was a rather large, portly, strong woman. One day I stopped by to see, I was on my way to a meeting. I stopped by to see how they were getting along and visited with them for a little while. And they were laughing and talking about what a time they were having, adjusting and learning how to get along now that he couldn't help himself. And I very well remember Molly, that was her name, followed me out to the car. This was on a Thursday afternoon. Stood there by the car and said, "Now, David, don't you worry about Harry. I'm big and strong. I'm healthy. I'll take care of him. You go ahead about your work. Don't worry about Harry." Monday came and our youth camp started. And 2 of my sons, my 2 older boys, had been on a trip and had come back by and stopped to see their Uncle Harry and came rushing back to Knoxville with the news that Molly was in the hospital unconscious. Thursday, she said, "I'll take care of Harry." Saturday night, during the night, he was awakened with her making some kind of a noise. Finally got the attention of their teenage daughter in another bedroom, and by the time she got there and got help, the mother was unconscious, lived 17 days, never regained consciousness. The doctors never decided what was wrong, went out into eternity without ever regaining consciousness. She was gone. Harry's still living. Some 30 years later, he's married again, 82 years of age, raising a big garden. But she's gone. We never know, friends. Death might say, "My staying is in the manner of my coming," but there's something even worse than that. So let's ask again, "Oh, death, where is thy staying?" And death may answer back, "My staying is in the impartiality of my coming. I don't spare anyone. The rich can't buy it up. The smart can't figure it out. The strong can't fight it away. I am absolutely," death might say, "absolutely impartial." And I know I'm preaching to somebody tonight, perhaps a good many people who say, "Well, that could happen to the other fellow, but it'll never happen to me." Brother, sister, death is impartial. The richest man, I suppose, that ever lived on this earth was old King Faisal of Saudi Arabia some years ago. Noted to be the richest man in the world, and perhaps the richest man that the world had ever known. Living high, had it all made, didn't have to worry about a thing in this world except a nephew of his who was a little off upstairs. And one day that nephew walked in with a pistol in his hand and shot old King Faisal. And in spite of his riches, he went out into eternity. Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived, he told us a lot about this fact that death was impartial. Solomon, with all of his wisdom, he couldn't keep away from it. Samson, the strongest man that ever lived, he couldn't keep from it. David, the man after God's own heart, finally had to face it. Brother, sister, you and I, no matter who we are, we're going to have to face the same thing. For death is absolutely impartial. But there's something worse than that about death. So let's ask it again. "Oh, death, where is thy sting?" Death might say to us, "My sting is in the sorrow that I leave after I come." And I'll have to confess to you, friends, this is the thing that strikes me the worst. Across these 59 years, I've been with hundreds of families in the hour of death. I've never gotten used to it. I pray God I never will. I've preached several funerals just recently, the last 3 months. I pray God I'll never get used to it. But no matter how well lived the person might have been, no matter how saintly they might have been, no matter how Sure we are that they made it to heaven. There's an aching void left back there. I can never get used to it. But oh, how awful it is for somebody to leave this world and leave a question mark about their destiny. How horrible it is for somebody to go when their loved ones know that they weren't ready to meet God. Oh, I've wept with many a loved one that's left behind. Precious mother, whose son at one time had been a good Christian young man, married to a fine young woman, a nurse, and a fine Christian girl, but lost out with God, went back to a life of drinking, and his hearted friend went out into eternity without God and without hope. I go into that hole. Here sits that precious mother, broken with sorrow. Brother Denton, my boy was all right, wasn't he? My boy was all right, wasn't he? Mother, I'd give the world if I could tell you that, but I can't. Go into a home where a husband has died without God. No home. Precious widow woman, walking the floor, back and forth, back and forth. I fall in step with him, walk with him, hoping I could say or do something that would bring comfort to that heart. Then with red, bleary eyes looking at me, Brother Dan, my husband's in heaven, isn't he? My husband's in heaven, isn't he? I'd give 10,000 worlds if I had him, if I could say, yes, he is, but I couldn't say it. Friend, you have no right to do that to your loved ones. I know a man here in the state of Indiana who invited me to go home and spend the night with him some years ago. And I tried to talk to him and get him to give his heart to God. His wife was a member of Pilgrim Holiness Church and a good saint of God, but her husband wasn't saved. And I tried to talk to that man. He listened. He was a gentleman. He wasn't a smart ass. But finally he said, Brother Denton, I appreciate your interest. But he said, I don't have anything to worry about. Why, he said, if I died tonight, my wife would be well taken care of. He said, I've made provision for her to be taken care of the rest of her life. My children, provision is made for their education to help them get a start in life. He said, I've thought of all of that. I've taken care of every bit of that. When he finally got through, I said, sir, that's thoughtful of you to do all of that, but I want to tell you something. The one thing that will leave the greatest heartbreak on your wife and on your children, you haven't taken care of. I know what it is to follow a loved one to the cemetery. I know what it is to watch the grave close, the pretty flowers laid on top of it, knowing that the soul of that loved one isn't in heaven. It's in the other place. You don't have any right. I say this, young man, young woman, you don't have any right to do your parents that way. You don't have any right to do your loved ones that way. To die without God and leave behind the broken hearts of your loved ones. That's an awful thing about death. But there's something worse than that. Of course, that's something that happens to you as an individual. The sting of death is sin. And the strength of sin is the law. And God's law says the soul that sinneth, it shall die. If you die without God, if you die unsaved, if you die unprepared to meet God, there's only one place you can go. And that's the place that was prepared for the devil and his angels. But you've made your choice. And there's no other place for you to go. There's only three places where a human being can live. in God's universe. One of them is where we are tonight. And thank God that we're able to be here. Another one is heaven. And another one is hell. You're going to leave this place. You're not going to stay here. Some of us aren't going to be here very long. I begin every morning with praise to God that He let me live through that night. And with a recognition that if I spend that day on this earth, it'll be the mercy and the grace of God that does it. I close every day by thanking God that He's given me another day in which to live for Him. And commit myself to Him, knowing that if I wake in the morning, it'll be the mercies of God that did it. We're here. We're not here to stay. We're here to go. But where we go depends on whether or not you're ready to go. If you want to go to heaven, you're going to have to get ready. And if you don't get ready, the only place left in God's universe will be hell. Oh, death, where is thy sting? Thy sting is in the fact that people live in sin, die without God, and go out into eternal hell. Oh, may God help us to see it. We don't have to die with sin in our hearts. Thank God we can get rid of that thing. We can get saved, forgiven of the sins we've committed, and we can get cleansed of that old sinful nature, that old carnal nature, that old Adamic sin, that old something down inside that fights against God and rebels against God and holds us away from God. We can get rid of that thing. Bless God forever. Jesus loved us and died for us that He might save us not only from sins committed, but from the sin nature inherited and get us ready to enjoy the glories of another land with Him. No wonder the old apostle cried out, "Thanks be unto God which giveth us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." We're going to have that victory tonight. If you're not ready for it, let me beg you, don't leave here tonight until you know that it's settled. If you knew that this morning's bright sunrise would be the last sunrise for you, that tomorrow you'd be over yonder, say, tell me, what would you do? And if you knew that tomorrow at noontime someone would be singing for you, that your soul had gone on to meet Jesus, friend, tell me, what would you do? And if you knew that tomorrow at evening, when falls the first diamonds of dew, that it would kiss the sweet rose where you're sleeping, say, tell me. Tell me, friend, what would you do? I feel like telling about a young lady. Some of you have heard me tell this, I'm sure. 1959, Sister Denton and I went to Chattanooga, Tennessee for a weekend meeting. God came on that meeting. It lasted 7 weeks. Would have gone on, I'm sure, had we been able to have done it. Every night souls were getting in. But there was one person in the city of Chattanooga that was on my wife's heart. There was a young lady in that town, an orphan girl, been reared by her grandparents. My wife and I had taken a special interest in her. We'd helped to send her, as we have a number of young people, we'd helped to send her off to Bible college. But in Bible college, she got in with the wrong crowd and lost her virtue. Returned home, became a literal streetwalker. Regarded the church in no wise, refused to go to church. We set out to find her. My precious wife loved young people. She was the means of winning many of them to Jesus Christ. She said, I must find her. We finally found her. Begged her to come to the meeting. Begged her to get back to God. She showed very little interest, but she didn't tell us exactly what she'd done. She said, Brother Denton, I'm dragging bottom. I'm as low down as a human being can be. There's no hope for me. We assured her that Jesus loved her and died for her. That if she'd let Him, He'd save her, forgive her, and take her back. She finally promised us. She said, "I'll promise you this. I'll come one service." And that's all we could get out of her. We didn't know what service that was going to be, but it turned out to be a Sunday morning service. And in that Sunday morning service, God had already told me what to preach on. I have never waited till I saw my congregation to preach. I try to wait on the Lord and find out, and then preach it regardless. And it just so happened that that morning, the Lord laid it on me to deal with a matter of immorality. And in the midst of my message on immorality, there was a bunch of people got mad and jumped up and went out. They slammed the door behind them. And I just had to stop for a little bit till the noise subsided before I could go on. Finally closed the service. Dismissed the congregation. Glanced back and I saw this girl standing back in the back. She hadn't gone out. I whispered to the wife, "Get back there. Keep her here if you can. Let's see if we can talk to her and help her." Wife got back, slipped her arms around her and let her know that she loved her and she was concerned about her. Congregation left. I slipped back there. We began to try to deal with her about her soul. She said, "Brother Denton, the reason I didn't leave, I want to tell you that some of those very men that got mad and went out when you preaching on immorality are men that I've had affairs with. Church men, if you please." But she stayed. Good pastor had sense enough not to interfere. Sometimes, we lose souls by somebody butting in. He saw what was going on. Slipped over to the parsonage and told his wife. He said, "Call the church people as soon as they get home. Have them pray." Then he himself stayed outside, walked back and forth and prayed. Time went by. An hour passed. We didn't seem to be getting anywhere. Hour and a half passed. Didn't seem to be getting anywhere. Hour and 45 minutes. And then 2 hours was rapidly approaching. And I saw we were about to lose her. Oh, God, don't let her get away. And finally, I called her by name and I said, "I don't want to worry you. I want to help you. I'd like to ask you one more question. And after I've asked you this question, I don't have anything else to say." She said, "Well, all right, Brother Denton. You can ask me anything you want to. You people have been more than parents to me. You can ask me anything you want to." I called her by name and I said, if you knew that you just had 30 minutes to live, what would you do?" An astonished look came in her face for a moment. And then she threw her hands in the air and literally screamed and said, "My God, if I only had 30 minutes to live, I'd pray." And down the aisle she rushed to the altar. We didn't bother. Sister Denton got over as far as she could get. I got over against the wall on the other side. If people really want to get through to God, you don't have to pet and pamper them. And these folks that you have to pet to get in, the devil will pet them out before 2 weeks has gone by. Brother, it wasn't 15 minutes till that precious girl with the light of God in her countenance and her hands in the air was shouting the high praise of God. And I'm convinced tonight, if you knew how soon death was going to seek you out and take you into eternity, you wouldn't leave here until you were sure it was settled. We stand together. Our heads are bowed. Our eyes are closed. I trust our hearts are open. The altar's open. You ought to be on your way tonight, friend. If you're not sure you're ready to meet God,